Hello, and welcome to Season 4 of the Multifarious Man podcast. This is episode 401, Design of a Decade. As always, I am your host, Jay Vincent. Can you actually believe it is 2020? Not only is it a new year, but it is a new decade. Growing up, movies like Blade Runner, Back to the Future 2, TV shows like The Jetsons had us convinced that we'd have flying cars and we'd either be working and living on the moon or Mars. Turns out not so much. I mean, we do have powerful computers in the palm of our hands, hybrid, electric, and self-driving vehicles. Let's not forget about cyber shopping. I mean, nowadays you can go and get anything you want, from food or even a car, and have it delivered to your home. So before I started recording today, I had a whole plan about talking about all the fabulous things that happened in the 2010s, or 2010 through 2019. But a funny thing happened on the way home, or rather near the end of the day at work. So, full disclosure, I am a die-hard Yankee fan. Baseball's my favorite sport. Like, literally, I will listen to preseason games, or for baseball, it's spring training. I'll listen to those games starting in February and March. I'll read about them year round, and then I really will either watch or listen to all of their games, 162 regular season, and however long the Yankees last in the playoffs. So what we find out today, and this has been, there's been rumors going around for a few years now, that the Houston Astros, who did win the championship in 2017, have been not only accused, but, there's proof that they actually cheated. So Major League Baseball came down today and announced punishments for the team. So here's what the announcements were. Manager AJ Hinch was suspended for 1 year. GM Jeff Lunau, and forgive me if I pronounce it wrong, was suspended for a year. Former assistant GM Brandon Taubman was suspended for a year. The team also has to forfeit their first and second round draft picks for the next 2 years. And also they're fined $5 million. Now that's the maximum that under the MLB Constitution they can be filed. So immediately following that, the owner of the Houston Astros actually fired their manager, AJ Hinch, and their general manager. So clean slate. Bye-bye. Doesn't matter if you have a year suspension, you're fired. You're not on the team anymore. So for me, as a baseball fan, as a team, my New York Yankees lost to the Houston Astros in 2017 on their way to winning a World Series title. Also, Dodger fans. The Dodgers, made it to the World Series, and they lost to the Houston Astros. Now, can you imagine Dodger fans out there not only frustrated that they lost, but the fact that it's now proven that the team cheated? On top of that, and again, full disclosure, I am a diehard Yankee fan, so our number one rival is the Boston Red Sox. Alex Cora, who became the manager for the Boston Red Sox in 2018 and led them to a World Series title, was the bench coach for the Houston Astros in 2017. And from everything that's being reported through news, sports, ESPN, CBS, all the different Sports Illustrated, Alex Cora was the main person on the coaching staff that was behind it. Now, this was a sophisticated scheme to steal signs from the other teams. Long story short, they set up cameras, they had monitors, and then once they figured out what the signs were, actual members of the team. Now, these are professional players, some of the best players in the game, and I won't get into the players, but the fact is players were involved. They cooperated with some of the coaching staff to cheat. Now, say what you want, and people want to say, well, all right, it's not the same as performance-enhancing drugs. I beg to differ. It's not the same as, say, a Pete Rose who was banned for life for gambling in baseball. Again, I beg to differ. It comes down to integrity. Now, for anyone out there that's going to say, all right, my favorite baseball player, whether it's Alex Correa, or Springer or some of the players on that team, I say, again, it comes down to integrity, because either you knew the cheating was going on and you participated, which, is cheating, or you knew the cheating was going on and you did nothing about it, didn't say anything about it, condone it. And I'm sorry, that's the same as participating in the actual cheating, because if you know someone in your organization, on your team, is doing something that they shouldn't do to get a competitive advantage, and you don't say anything and you kind of just turn a blind eye, I have a problem with that. Now, say what you will about, Roger Clemens, and again, allegedly using performance-enhancing drugs. Alex Rodriguez, again, both of these players have played for the Yankees, so I am definitely biased. But if you're saying, okay, they cheated, got a competitive advantage, I mean, they still had to go out there and perform, but I dare someone to get on on sports stories and say, no, it's not the same. Performance-enhancing drugs is a different type of cheating. Integrity is integrity. If you're going to say, these are the rules, you have to follow these rules, and if you break these rules, you're cheating, what's the difference? So I'm not going to get on a big soapbox, because I probably wore it out from standing on it talking about this. But again, imagine the fans of the teams that lost to it. Now, for the Boston Red Sox organization, I have no love for the organization. I'm happy when the team loses. But as a fan of baseball, now what is their team going to do? Because Houston, immediately the owner fired the managers and the general manager that were basically in charge at the time this happened. So now with Boston, if Alex Cora really was a main coach that was involved in this cheating, and from everything we've heard and everything we've seen, and Rob Manfred, the commissioner of baseball, has been very deliberate with this, he was involved. So the question is, as the current coach, is he going to be suspended the same as A.J. Hinch was, who was the manager at the time? If so, is it going to be for a year? Is it going to be for a different time frame? Who knows? If it is, what did the Boston Red Sox do? So are they going to, we're about to have spring training begin. So pitchers and catchers in baseball are actually going to start to arrive in February. So it's not too far away. This is the time of year when the manager is a big part of getting the roster together. Also, you have players going through arbitration. You're signing free agents. So again, this is when the actual structure of your team is going to be put together for the next season. So when is Boston going to find out what's going to happen to their coach? Are they going to be proactive and either suspend him or fire him now, as opposed to waiting to find something later? But either way, it's a major black eye to baseball. Say what you want about the steroid era in the 80s and 90s. Say what you want. I personally say this is closer to the Black Sox scandals in 1919 with the Chicago White Sox, where, they actually conspired to throw actual games. So to actual lose games for money. So again, it comes down to the integrity of the game. And whether it's sports, life, business, doesn't matter. Integrity is everything. So I'm sorry if you knew about it and you didn't do anything about it. That's an embarrassment to the game. The city of Houston certainly doesn't deserve this, because they come out to support their team. And anybody that's on the team now that wasn't a part of this, well, people are always going to say, you cheated. Your World Series should have an asterisk. It's tainted. But it's to be seen. It's just a real disappointment. And anytime integrity and cheating come into play, it's just hard to stomach. You want to teach our kids, you want society to behave a certain way, and then something like this happens. Yeah, it's a game, but if someone's going to cheat at a game, and there's a lot of money to be made in baseball, then what else are they going to cheat at? That's my story for the day. Didn't want to get on a rant, but again, baseball is my favorite sport, and it's kind of hard not to say something. That being said, crazy start to season 401. Now back to the normal normally scheduled programming for the Multifarious Man podcast. So last year, for anyone that did listen to the show, we changed things up a little bit, had a couple of regular shows, but then through a friendship I have with a gentleman, Beeman Kendall, who we used to work together, and we became friends at work, and we continue to be friends. He started a company called a BK thing called Beloved, and it's all about positivity, positive images, basically to uplift the community. Basically out of his own pocket. This is what he wanted to do: give back. He's was raised well. He has a good job in the finance industry, but he wanted to put his, feet to the road, basically talk it and walk it. So what we did in spring of last year, spring, we actually did a series of live shows downtown Jacksonville, Florida, at a local deli. We actually came out, put on a live show of the Multifarious Man podcast, interview, live topics. And at one point we were joined by a local activist, Christina Kittle, and we talked about politics. We talked about different things in the community to make things better. We talked about the upcoming election at that time for the mayor of Jacksonville, city council. And the thought is this year I plan on continuing to do the same thing, whether it's live pop-up shows, call-in interviews with people I've spoke to in the past, or people here in the local community in Jacksonville. So it's not just me talking about the things I love in music, films, books, TV, those things also, but some current topics, current events, some politics, not much, because I don't want to really turn people off, but I think where all of the arts intersects with community, giving back, community involvement, things like that. I think that's a positive thing. So you really don't even, whatever side of the spectrum you're on, Democrat, Republican, doesn't matter who you support. I think there's a lot of things that people have in common, and a lot of that has to do with community, giving back, and finding ways to improve everyone's life. So that being said, be on the lookout this season for interviews with local artists, local people that give back to the community, churches, nonprofit organizations, whatever I can do to, have people get their voice heard and, just bring some attention to different things in our local community that should be able to be brought to light, positive things. You don't want it to be all negative, but I think people should get spotlight where they're doing good for their community. That's it. So that being said, just sit back, relax, and join me for a look back at the last 10 years of music, movies, TV, books, and technology. And we'll be back right after this break.
Things I want to say that never been told. Dina Sinatra to Drake and Pharrell. When I'm listening to this week, you can never tell. Bogey and Bacall, even Meryl Streep. The devil wears Prada, even the big sleep. It doesn't matter where you stand. I'm the multifarious man.
All right, I am back again. This is the Multifarious Man podcast, episode 401, and I am your host, Jay Vincent. So, 2010 to 2020, wow, a lot has happened in that time. The way that we consume music, books, the way we see television, everything from small screens to big screen, there's been a lot of changes in how we're able to, the way that we actually interact with technology. If you think about it, 2010, and I probably need to look this up, but, iPad, iPhone is just over 10 years old. I mean, it passed that mark, if not last year, a couple of years ago. So if you think about it, how we interacted with things from music, CDs, films, DVDs were still the way. Something like Netflix. So if you want to talk about streaming wars, Netflix was a DVD by mail company. And it basically was the alternative to Blockbuster. Blockbuster or your local video store, you went, you got your, eventually in the beginning it was, videotape, VHS, for the old heads. Then it moved to DVD, but what it was, you rented a movie for a day or two, and then if you returned it late, you had crazy fees. So along comes Netflix, and for a monthly fee, it was kind of like all you can eat, however many, and you had different plans. You can have 1, 2, 3, I think even 4 DVDs at a time, but there were no late fees. So you got a movie, you liked it, a series, whatever, you held on to it as long as you wanted to, and then when you were done, you just popped it in the mail. Eventually, Netflix, I guess they saw the writing on the wall, because around 2012, as internet access became faster speeds, you now were having phones with unlimited data. So in 2010, Netflix actually switched over to streaming. And then eventually in 2012, they actually started creating their own content. Initially, it was reruns, TV shows, things that you hadn't saw in years, movies that they can purchase a licensing agreement to show. So now, in the comfort of your home, you were now watching these shows initially on your computer. Eventually, the technology was put into DVD players, set-top boxes, all type of things. So now people were consuming all of this, TV shows, movies, shows people hadn't seen for years were now popular again. If you hadn't seen a show, when it was first run, like take, for example, Friends or The Office, extremely popular on streaming services, because now people were able to, what they call binge watching. Now you could watch a whole series, 8 years of a show in a couple of months. You didn't have to wait around to see something. That really kicked it off. And as more people moved to broadband, you had faster cable modems, cable internet access. Well, now you just needed content to fill those eyes. So now there was the competition for who you were going to get that content from. Now, years ago, cable companies were always worried. People kept saying, well, why am I paying this amount for all these channels and I really only want this number of channels? So the cable companies consistently fought from a la carte pricing, where you could just say, hey, I just like these 10 channels, just charge me for this. I don't want all that extra garbage. Well, Netflix kind of said, hey, for this low fee, you can have the DVD plan, but then we introduced this streaming plan. And eventually, I don't even know anyone that even does the DVD plan anymore, because streaming now on phones, on things like the iPad, which wasn't around in 2010, Samsung tablets, all of these different phones, data plans, unlimited, as you had access to bigger and better devices. Now suddenly everyone was watching shows, movies, TV programs on their phones, on their tablets. They weren't just sitting in front of their television. That would kind of come along later, where TVs, smart TVs, set-top boxes like your Rokus of the world, where you had all of these apps, which again, thank you Apple for, having the iPhone and the whole App Store concept. So now everyone has all these apps. So with streaming services, of course, Netflix was the king for a while. And, they really didn't have competition in terms of all the content that they had. So on top of Netflix, you had Hulu, which also started streaming around 2010. Now, this was a joint venture owned by NBC Universal and News Corp, which is basically Fox and later on Disney. And they would have a lot of their, they had a whole back catalog of shows that they produced over the years that now they could actually stream. And it was originally just on your PC. It was free. And then eventually they started adding a subscription service so you could have commercial free. And then, so now you have Hulu. Amazon Prime. Now, Amazon was known for shipping, 2-day shipping. That was their whole thing. They introduced Prime. So for a certain fee each year, you had free 2-day shipping for everything. So you shopped a lot, which, these days most people do. It was beneficial. So, well, how do you distinguish yourself from other people? Well, Amazon got into the business of offering content, initially just video, and then eventually they got into actually creating their own content also. So now here's an added benefit to have people interested in using their Prime services. Like, hey, not only if you sign up for Prime, we'll give you all these movies and TV shows to go along with your free shipping, which I think is amazing. And it's, once again, where we're trying to get away from cable companies and direct TVs of the world where you were paying, these crazy prices for just limited things. Now it kind of went full circle where now you were doing the same thing where you were nickel and diming your way to all these different services to have access to the different things that you want to use. So about a year ago, no, it's actually been longer now, goodness, about 5-6 years ago, CBS All Access came out. Now, CBS is owned by Viacom. Again, they had a big back catalog, like they own all of the Star Trek series. So now here with all of their produced content, you introduce CBS All Access. Again, another service, another fee, but everyone was trying to distinguish themselves. So the big thing that kind of has driven the streaming wars is content. Who is gonna have the biggest movies, the biggest TV shows? So not only just the stuff that's on reruns, but also it's like, all right, we're gonna produce our own content. We're gonna try to be like the HBOs of the world, where we're going to have the best shows, the best movies, and you're going to want to subscribe to our service so you can have access to these things that you're not going to get anywhere else. So that's where Netflix kind of went out and started investing immediately, and you ended up with shows like House of Cards, Orange is the New Black, Stranger Things, and more recently, The Witcher. You also had movies, movie events like Bird Box, which was a big major streaming win last year. It may have been 2 years now. But now people, major stars, major directors were actually being paid to produce content for streaming services. So you didn't have to go to the movie theaters to see these things. Now you could actually see them in the comfort of your home with a service that you were already using. So, Netflix was the king for a while. Hulu started coming out with their own original content shows like Castle Rock and The Handmaid's Tale. Amazon has shows like Man in the High Castle, Mozart in the Jungle, Miss Maisel, which has won awards. Also, more recently, they actually resurrected a show that was on Sci-Fi called The Expanse. I mean, that's another thing I forgot to mention in the beginning. That was another thing that the streaming services like Netflix actually were able to do. Shows that were on network television or on free cable, I'd say not the HBOs of the world, but like TBS's, TNTs of the world, where shows were not being renewed for whatever reason, whether it was cost of production, or just low ratings. Well, now someone like a Netflix or a Hulu or an Amazon could come in, pick up a show, pick up their back catalog, and produce new shows, usually at a cheaper price, whether they moved it to a new location or, well, they would just open up their pockets because it was, for them, it was more important to get the show than to whatever the money they were going to spend, it was going to be worth it, because here you had a prestige show that you could say, again, as you're trying to get more subscribers and keep subscribers, that's where, the money was going to be. So fast forward to 2019, and that's when things really are ramping up. So at the end of 2019, Disney, who through the course of the 2010s basically became the king of all media, through not only through their Marvel, the MCU, the Marvel Cinematic Universe, all things Iron Man, all things the Avengers, billion-dollar movie franchises. Also, Disney is the company that brought Lucas films from George Lucas, so they actually started the Star Wars franchise again, new movies, new episodes, but they also came up with a little service called Disney Plus. Now, Disney has such an extensive back catalog of movies that they produced over the years, not just cartoons, TV shows, movies, things like Herbie the Love Bug, things you haven't thought about in years, Parent Trap. So it's not just the cartoons, the Lion Kings of the world, of which Disney has recently been doing live action remakes of things like Aladdin and Lion King and Jungle Book. So now Disney comes to the table, and they're the 800-pound gorilla. So Netflix, has been eating well for years, and here comes along Disney Plus with their extensive back catalog, but also new content. They were the ones to be able to finally crack the nut of finally getting, nerd that I am, a Star Wars TV show, weekly Star Wars TV show. Didn't have to wait years. Wasn't just a cartoon. Now, mind you, Rebels, Clone Wars, great. But here you had The Mandalorian. Unbelievable. Came out of the blue. Amazing. And, I want to point out that Jon Favreau, who actually was the creator of The Mandalorian, doesn't get enough credit as being the creator. I don't care what anybody says. There's a name you hear, Kevin Feige, who's done a lot for the MCU, Marvel Cinematic Universe, but it would not be what it is today without Jon Favreau as the director of Iron Man, the first Iron Man. You may know him on screen as Happy. He's Tony Stark's bodyguard / driver. So you've seen him on screen over the years, but he does not get enough credit as being the director of the first big MCU movie. So all these years later, Marvel and Disney is still going. Oh, also, so on top of Disney Plus, Marvel also bought Fox Studios. So the whole back catalog of Fox. So this is everything that goes along with that. So that includes all of the X-Men. So for all the fans out there that were upset over the years that you didn't have your X-Men in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, because in the comics over the years, the X-Men, the Avengers, they've always been intertwined. So now they're together under one roof. So, what's going to come next? I mean, I think the sky's the limit. So for those of us nerds out there that have, always wanted something, whether it's fantasy shows, sci-fi shows, now we have an abundance on all different TV platforms. So not to be undone, speaking of streaming, also this fall, Apple came out with their Apple TV, which I can't think of the name of it. I really am not sure who has it, but all from what I hear, shows like C, which stars Jason Momoa, and The Morning Show, which stars Jennifer Aniston, seem to be getting good reviews. But again, it just comes down to new, fresh content, and it seems like these days some of the best stories, writing, acting is actually happening on television, which is not traditional television anymore. It's cable, it's streaming services, it's the HBOs of the world, and of course, traditional primetime television. So that's not the end of the streaming wars, because in this new decade, in the first year of the new decade, HBO Max will be joining the fray, and also Peacock, which is from NBC Universal. So again, just when, as a consumer, we were getting away from having to spend all this money for all these channels through your cable service, now on the back end, we're back. So we're kind of getting a la carte, and we're probably going to end up spending the same as we did through just our cable company, but now we're just giving our cable company money for high-speed internet access, and we're giving all the content providers our hard-earned dollars for their streaming services. But it hasn't been disappointed. There's a lot of good quality. Some of the best stuff, some of the best writers, some of the best creators are getting opportunities where because you have so many different services and so many different opportunities, now people that maybe years ago wouldn't have been able to crack through, whether it is on traditional premium cable or through your typical primetime or your network television stations, your CBS, your ABC of the world, NBC. Now with so many different outlets, a lot of content creators are having an opportunity to shine. So I think it's a good time for people and art, and just looking forward really to the next decade, to see what happens next. Whereas the 2010s went along, we thought things like 3D TV, some of the gimmicks, curved TVs, we thought that was going to be where it was at, but it seems like more people are watching more TV and more content on small devices, when it just goes to show you is if you have quality, people will follow. So it's not always about the tricks, it's not always about the technology, but if you give people something good to latch onto, they'll come back. That's really it for the streaming wars. I'm kind of talking about video. We'll take a short break. When I come back, talk a little bit about music and a few other things that have happened in the last decade. Again, this is the Multifarious Man podcast. I am Jay Vincent, and we will be back shortly. All right, we're back from that short break. Again, this is the Multifarious Man podcast, episode 401, and I am your host, Jay Vincent. So, 2010 to 2020, another decade. Well, in this past decade, music has changed dramatically. So, used to be at the beginning of the decade, yeah, sure, physical musical sales continue to decline, while with digital sales starting to grow, actually in leaps and bounds. So by the end of the decade, streaming music was king, with people preferring to have access to millions of songs on demand. Spotify is still the worldwide king, but in only 5 years, Apple Music has become number 2 on the streaming mountain. Now, many decades ago, decades, I don't know where that pronunciation came from. Before the Beatles hit the scene in the 60s, singles were it. That was how musicians sold music. That's how they made their name. It was not about long-form content. It was 2 minutes, 3 minutes singles. That was it. Days of Elvis, singles. All of your hit singers back in the day, that's what it was. So then the Beatles came across the scene, and it became about the album. So now musicians were telling whole stories. People were buying albums. You think about Pink Floyd and The Wall. You think about The Who and Tommy. You think about these stories. Speaking of the Beatles, you talk about the White Album, Sgt. Pepper. You look at musicians, and it was all about long form content. They were telling a story. It wasn't just singles. It was the whole concept album, telling a whole story, having a whole concept behind it. But yes, you still had, hit singles for radio. You had those things that were driving sales. But when people came to see him in concerts, it was, all about the whole story, the B-sides, things along that line. So nowadays, it's come full circle. Some of the top musicians, artists, all different genres, it's back to singles, EPs. I heard in an interview probably a couple of weeks ago, and it might have been on CBS this morning, or it's either Saturday or Sunday. And the interview was talking to Ringo Starr. Of course, Ringo Starr, was one of the members of the Fab Four. And he was releasing I think he just released another album. And what he was saying is, not only does he do all of his recording in his own home, the technology has made that possible, but he's saying his next project, EPs, so, extended play, that is going to be what he's going to be doing next. So no more full-length albums. It'll be 2 or 3 songs. That's kind of like, in the heyday of hip hop, you had, people like Lil Wayne. It was their mixtapes. Drake, that's how his claim to fame was. And now, all these years later, he's, the top streaming star of all time, because people consume music differently. Just like with video streaming, music streaming, is, the way to go. People are no longer buying whole albums. They're actually buying singles, or not even buying singles anymore. They're listening to singles, but it's all streaming. All you consume, you pay one fee and you listen to whatever songs you want. They're on that service, and it's just a matter of preference between which service you want to use, whether it's Spotify, whether it's Apple Music, Google Play, also Amazon Prime Music, which is part of their Prime package. And then they also have, Prime Music. And then later on, Jay-Z's service, Tidal. So no longer are people buying, you're not buying whole albums. You have streaming. And again, this is a part of the way technology has improved over the years, because people have these, amazing computers in their hands. They're smartphones that can do everything, but also you have these data plans with your cell phone companies where you have unlimited data. So now if you have a music plan with unlimited data, you can listen to whatever song you want, whenever you want, on whatever device you want. So, there's not a need or a desire for people to really own anything anymore, because what are you going to play it on? Cars aren't coming with CD players anymore. They're just coming with stereos that connect to your smartphone. So you're either connecting through Bluetooth or through USB. You have Apple, you have CarPlay, you have, which is Apple, you have Google Play. So now your music's in the palm of your hands. Listen to what you want, when you want. You basically have your own personalized radio station. So there's not a need to own physical content. So where the money is being made, so artists are making their money on tour, but they're not making, the same money that they were in physical sales. But fortunately, the industry has continued to evolve. So, folks like Billboard and the likes, where they actually track how many sales that an artist has, they've actually changed the formula to actually include streaming. So no, they're not making the same money, but they're trying to figure out the equivalent of what, like they did, back in the day for radio airplay, where they were making a certain, percentage or a certain amount each time their song was played. Well, now they're trying to refine the formula so that artists are being compensated for their content. And of course, the artists will continue to fight with the streaming services to ensure that they are being compensated properly. So as all these companies are getting these subscriptions and they have the money coming in each month, that the artists, which has the content that people want to listen to the most are actually being compensated properly. But that's a story for another episode. But what's crazy, and I'm finding, is as the decade came to an end, you're hearing that vinyl records are making a comeback. So people aren't buying CDs. And what it is so when you have streaming music, and it just really comes down to technology, if you're a data provider, if you're a streaming service, if you're whoever you are, you want to try to find the way to get the most amount of data using the smallest amount of data packets. So it really comes down to if you think about if you're using your water at home and, you pay a water bill, the more you run that faucet, the more you're going to have to pay. So streaming music is kind of the same way. Data has a cost. So imagine if you could have the same music, or what they say, if you can't hear the difference, and this is where MP3 became kind of the big encoding. MP3 is a file type, and what it is a way to take music and using fancy algorithms and science and math to compress it, so that you can transmit it as a smaller file size. Which again, smaller file size, less data, you can transmit more. So, more bang for your buck. So with the file size changes, when you compress something, you make something smaller and smaller, it's not going to sound the same. As you can try to use technology to take that music and make it sound the same way. But the truth of the matter is, if, you plug in some headphones and you're listening to an MP3, and then you do the same thing and you're listening to an actual vinyl record, it will not sound the same. It just doesn't. Just like if you're hearing a live show, it's not going to sound the same as, what you hear on the record or so. So what it comes down to is more and more people, and I don't know if it's the older crowd or even the younger crowd, but it seems vinyl is not going to be where it was years ago before CDs came along and knocked it out. But I'm glad to hear that vinyl music is making a comeback, because there's a certain sound of and it's just maybe it's just that tactile connection between taking a record out of its sleeve, put it on your record player, turning it on, putting that needle, hearing that crackling sound before the music kicks in, and just that feeling and that sound. So I think it's a good thing. I have some vinyl music myself. You can always find it in your thrift shops, some of your music stores, but musicians are actually re-releasing some of their albums that may not have been released initially on vinyl in the past 10 years, and they're actually re-releasing certain music content, and people are buying it. So I think it's a good thing. Also, sticking on the music, a couple of big things, or really three big things, happened in the 2010s. So hip hop, which basically has come a long way from the South Bronx in the late 70s, corner parties, DJing, beatboxing, breakdancing. So before the end of the decade, you had Jay-Z, Dr. Dre, and also Sean Combs. I'm still going to call him Sean Combs, even though he's going through Puff Daddy, P. Diddy, all that stuff. So here are these three individuals that started out in hip-hop, became media moguls, and joined the Billionaire Club. Now, don't quote me on the Puffy side of it, but definitely Jay-Z and Dr. Dre. Dr. Dre, through his affiliation with headphones, Beats by Dre. Imagine, here is Dr. Dre from NWA, bringing along Snoop Dogg and Eminem and 50 Cent. But because of his attention to detail and sound, basically, was an investor in a headphone company, which later on Apple bought out. And through that affiliation, he became a billionaire. Jay-Z, through his music catalog, clothing lines, and wines and spirits. I can't remember which type of, whether it's vodka or whatever it is. But either way, from where they all started to where they are now, hip hop is not going away, and there's a lot of money to be made, and and then special mention to someone like 50 Cent, who not only has invested wisely in beverage companies, but also has been a major player in producing actual TV shows. So he's been quite successful in that vein. Really no stopping it with that, but music is not just one thing anymore. But people still go to concerts, but now the way you consume music as a whole has changed in the past decade. That's really all I have to say about that. Suddenly I'm Forrest Gump. When we get back, just talk about a few more things in terms of book technology, which has come a long way, and just kind of looking forward to some of the things that I'll be talking about this season, but immediately some of the shows I'm geeking out about. That's it, and I will be back momentarily. Again, this is the Multifarious Man podcast, and I am your host, Jay Vincent. All right, I am back. Again, this is the Multifarious Man podcast, episode 401. So, as we close out the decade and kind of close out the show, I want to say probably around, probably 2003, 2004, when e-readers were starting to take off. I think I've probably had about 3 different kinds. I think I had a Sony e-reader. I had something called a Rocket Book at one point. Basically, because I love reading, I love books, to have something where I could actually carry hundreds of books in the palm of my hand, and in some cases, and initially they cost the same as actual physical books, but for me, it was the amazing part of the technology. You didn't have to read with a night light. They had their own light source built in, and you had access to all these books at any time that you wanted to read. And eventually, they made deals with libraries to, be able to have digital books that you could read. So fast forward years later, and, I'm not sure who else makes e-readers, but Kindle by Amazon, the technology has changed so much. From what I can say, when I first had one all those years ago, eye strain, it wasn't, the text, they tried to make the text look as close as it could to reading, on paper, but it wasn't the same. And, you didn't want to read for long periods of time. But now, the Kindles have gotten so sophisticated. They have a Paperwhite edition that it really does look like you're looking at a piece of paper. The recreation is spot on. Not only do they have long battery life, they can hold a lot of information. They connect to the internet, through Wi-Fi now, where in the beginning they had special modems built in. But basically you carry thousands of books in the palm of your hand. You can have services like Prime Reading, where it's unlimited number of books. But there's so many different services, and not to steer away from your library, because all of your local libraries now allow you to basically take out a digital copy of the book, same like you would with a physical, except you don't go to the library, you go through their website. And it's the greatest thing when you have it for 2 weeks and you don't have to take it back. The license just won't let you open the book anymore after 2 weeks. So it's actually pretty neat. And if you like reading, kids like reading, they don't like having, something physical in their hand, and they don't want to use their cell phone or their tablet. It's a great way to go. I definitely can say the prices, you can always find a good deal. Definitely worth it. And if you sign up for different newsletters and different free book sites, BookBub, I think, is one of them. You get emails every day, and a lot of time you'll, find links to free books. Yeah, usually it's trying to get, they're trying to get you to buy that first one, get that first dose, so then you'll buy the other books in a series. But again, you have access to so many different authors, self-published, small publish, Paul publishers, all of the big publishers, all the well-named authors. It's just a good time to be a consumer of books. So, even though people listen to a lot of music, watch a lot of TV and movies, books aren't going to go away. And it's a really good time to be a consumer because you literally have the world of information at your fingertips. That's really it. I was going to talk about shows that I'm watching right now, but I think I've kind of stuffed a lot into this premiere episode, so I'll save some of that for future episodes. Some reviews on some books I'm reading, some shows I'm really into right now, and I definitely want to recommend. Again, I'll say The Mandalorian. It's amazing. The Witcher is also very good. So if you have access to these different services, and not to leave Amazon Prime out and Hulu, but Amazon Prime, The Expanse, highly recommended. Also based on a series of books, which I also recommend reading also. And then on Hulu, there's just a lot of good content. Been going back watching old series like Elementary, which is a modern take on Sherlock Holmes. So something to recommend. Also on there now is Firefly, one of the best sci-fi shows ever. And Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Angel. So there's a lot out there. And if you have some or all of these, I'm sure you can, take advantage of it. Oh, almost forgot. Roku. Roku devices in my house are king. Between my wife and my kids, we have them connected to every television, and it actually, where initially you thought you'd do less together, where it's not like back in the days where you had appointment television and you sat around and you knew, every week at a certain time the family would sit around and watch a show because you weren't recording it. There was no DVR. There was no on demand. But now it's the same, but, we kind of watch shows together, tried new things. You're willing to try new things. And it actually has, created some interesting family time where we're laughing, joking, playing, inside jokes about the silly shows that we're watching as a family. So that to be said, they used to call it the boob tube, rat your brain. No, I think if as long as a family, you have controls in place, make sure you know what your children are watching, but have open dialogue. Watch the shows with them. Some of the things that you thought were tailored for kids, you may enjoy them also. I'm one that's never shied away from a SpongeBob or a Teen Titan Go, even though I prefer the original Teen Titans, but I won't get into that. But it's have an open dialogue with your kids. Know what they're watching, because they have access to so much. Take an interest in what they're watching, what they're listening to. You'd be surprised. Sure, they're not going to think you're any cooler. They're still going to think you're lame, but they'll enjoy bringing you along for a ride, and it gives you something else to have a conversation about. So that's my little public service announcement. That's the word from Officer Bird. That's his tip for the day. The more you know, knowing is half the battle. I can go on and on and on. But that's it for the premiere episode of Season 4 of the Multifarious Man podcast. Again, you can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Multifarious Man, and also on Facebook. If you have comments or suggestions for future episodes, please definitely you can send an email to multifarious.man.podcast@gmail.com. Of course, also follow the show on Spreaker, on Spotify, on iTunes, any place that you will find podcasts, and definitely please leave reviews. It definitely does help. I definitely will read the comments, and it goes a long way to help me know if I'm succeeding at, if you like what you're hearing, if you're interested in something else. But definitely let me know. Feedback is definitely important. Again, this is Jay Vincent, Multifarious Man podcast, and I'm out.
Some very greatly diverse and manifold. All the things I want to say that never been told. Dina Sinatra to Drake and Pharrell. When I'm listening to this week, you can never tell. Bogey and Bacall, even Meryl Streep. The devil wears Prada, even the big sleep. It doesn't matter where you stand. I'm the multifarious man.